How is housing a problem in the Bay Area?
I believe that the biggest problem is the cost of housing, which directly is affected by supply and demand. So if you have too much demand, then prices go up, and if you have too little supply, they go up, and if you have too little demand or too much supply, they go down. In our case in the Bay Area, with all the technology jobs that are being created almost on a daily basis, I believe that there is a shortage of housing, and I think most experts would agree. And as a result, it increases prices and subsequently increases rental units as well.
How does housing affect the quality of life of local workers?
The cost of housing directly affects the quality of life for the workers, because the more they have to spend out of their disposable income on housing means fewer dollars for food, clothing, and other expenses, transportation, and the like. Therefore, as rent or the cost of purchasing a home goes up, unless wages correspondingly go up at an equal rate or greater rate, then the quality of life, hence the standard or level of living for those individuals, will obviously go down.
Why are housing prices so high in the Bay Area?
One of the reasons is a geographical reason, in that many of our communities have moratoriums that prevent building outside of certain limits, particularly the foothills of Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County. Hence, there's only so much room left to build housing unless you go up, which is what's actually happening now. What used to be two-story apartment buildings are being torn down, replaced with 6- and 8-story apartment buildings. But that's expensive construction. And as a result, if you want to live close to your job and it happens to be in Silicon Valley, you're going to pay a premium for all that housing unless you choose to go outside the area, i.e. Tracy, Modesto, Los Banos, Salinas, places like that, resulting in 1 to 2 hour commutes both ways.
In what ways does Bay Area housing affect newer generations?
I think one of the problems for the younger people, the millenniums, if you will, is that wages have not gone up as rapidly as housing in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. For example, when I first started teaching back in the late 60s, 1960s and early 70s, you could buy a nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo in Cupertino for $35,000. Today, that same condo is $1,500,000. It's gone up, about 100 times. But wages, I started working for $8,000 a year back then. I would have to be making about $300,000 or $400,000 a year as a beginning teacher today to afford the same quality of housing as I did back then. So I think that says all you need to know about the fact that housing has just gone up much, much more rapidly than have wages.
How does education affect home ownership in the Bay Area?
Well, I think it's a well-known fact that the more education one has, the greater likelihood they will have a better quality of life, and that also means more income. Not only will they have more knowledge to problem solve with, but they'll also have more income to spend on housing and other necessities. So I think if you look at what is important for a young person, particularly today, is that they want to maximize their educational background so that they at least provide themselves the greatest opportunity to achieve at their highest potential. And that's how I'd answer that question.
How does Bay Area housing affect families?
I think that, generally speaking, when the family has to work harder, that is mom and dad, generally, have to work harder in order to bring in enough income to cover the cost of housing, there's going to be a price paid for that. And that price is often less time, fewer hours with their children, their young adults, and all the things that they need help with. That could be tutoring, that could be sports, that could be downtime as a family where you just get together and do things together, which all is really critical to the harmony of a family. So I would say that increased housing costs can't be helpful, but only detrimental to the growth of a family in the Bay Area.
How do housing prices affect the rental market?
I'm going to answer that question in two parts. One would be how I would have answered it 15 or 20 years ago, and how I used to answer that question when I was asked, and how I would answer it today. 15 or 20 years ago, I would say that when housing prices went up, it often decreased the price of rents. Why? It's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Because people were then jumping into housing, buying because they were afraid to miss the bandwagon. So they would move out of their rental, they had saved their money, buy a condo or a home because they thought it was going to even go higher. And that created some vacancies in the apartment business, which resulted sometimes in lower rents, which is, again, counterintuitive. Today, I'm finding there seems to be less of that and more of, as housing goes up, rentals become more and more attractive. But that's because housing seems to be going up, not crazy like back in the 70s. Literally, housing would double. The price of a home could double every 2 years. Double every 2 years. So you take an average $1 million home in Santa Clara Valley, 2 years from now it's worth $2 million. 4 years from now it's worth $4 million. That was insane, but that was going on in the 70s. That is not going on anymore. I mean, you see maybe a 5%, 10%, 15% increase, but not 100% over a 2-year period of time. So that frenzy to run out and buy a house is not as obvious today as it might have been back in the 70s.
How do you feel about rent control?
I am somewhat ambivalent about rent control. Obviously, as a landlord, one way I could answer it is I think it's a terrible idea because it limits supply, and that will only cause more demand, and hence it'll be more and more difficult for people to find reasonable, affordable housing. That's one approach. But actually, there's another side to that, and that is I think it's called rent gouging. Participated in that concept. I grew up in a rental unit until I was 13 years old. Maybe that influenced me. I know it did. And I know how difficult it is for families that are renting and how little hope they have for the future sometimes because they get into that rent spiral thing. So I believe there should be rent control on gouging, which means that maybe something like no greater than 10% in a year, and then maybe 10% the next year, or something like maybe 7% plus CPI, cost of living adjustment, something that's reasonable like that, so that families are not caught in the fear of knowing that their rent could go up literally 50% overnight and there's nothing they can do about it. I don't believe that that's right either, but I also don't believe that low caps on rent like 5% when costs of water, garbage, electricity, maintenance, operations, roofing, all the things that a landlord has to deal with are going up faster than 5%. So you can't make it work if you're getting less income and your expenses are greater. So that whole paradigm doesn't work as well. So I think it's, like I said, I'm ambivalent about the question, but I think there needs to be a lot of research and work done in that area before any decision is made.
What is your solution to Bay Area housing issues?
Well, if I were at a city council meeting in the city of San Jose or Mountain View or Cupertino, I probably would not be a popular speaker if I voiced the view that I have right now. And here's my view. I think as long as you keep building commercial square footage by the tens of thousands, millions of square feet, encouraging more and more commercial to come into a community that doesn't have enough supporting space for housing, you have a problem. the problem in Silicon Valley is, as I said earlier, there's a moratorium on building to expand outwards to places like Coyote Valley, and hopefully that will maintain off limits. But the real problem is that more and more jobs are being created by like the Google Village that is going to be built in downtown San Jose here in the next 5 or 6 years. This is going to create 20,000+ jobs, but they don't really know where the housing is going to come from. Probably high-rise apartment buildings up and down the Caltrans corridor, which I think becomes a problem in itself. So I don't believe that high density, like what you have in New York City, is the solution. I think it just reduces the quality of life for everyone. So my view would be, let's move some of this commercial to other areas like Pleasanton, San Ramon, areas where they have room in Brentwood and places like that to build housing on a single level basis. So that would be my recommendation, is that city governments step away from it, look at it from the outside, and realize that their interest in maximizing tax dollars should not be the overriding decision on what is best for the community.